Good afternoon. It is indeed Christmassy time is here. December the 22nd. I am Matthew Holt. This is the THCB Gang. Let me just tell you who we've got on the gang going around. I won't put the slide back up, so I failed to screw up. Deven McGraw, data stewardship at Invitae and citizen, and now a member of HITAC, which you'll tell us what the hell HITAC is. So, Mike Magee, medical historian from Connecticut. Jen Benz, queen of all employee benefits from San Francisco, and first patient advocate, Casey Quinlan from Mighty Casey Media and the Healthcare is Hilarious podcast. Gang, we made it to Christmas. At least two of us dressed up, and you've got something festive coming. There's some festive stuff in the background everywhere. Good enough. We'll call it that. Of course, tomorrow is my favorite holiday of the year, which is not Kwanzaa. Festivus, where you get to air the grievances and do the feast of strength patrol. I've been invited to a Hanukkah party tomorrow. I'm saying I'm bringing bacon sandwiches and my grievances. We'll see how I go. All right. So we're going to try later on in this session. We should have some fun. Hopefully, some of our other gang members will show up around about 45 minutes in, and we can have a little end of year celebration with everybody. We'll see. Sometimes a lot of them show up. Sometimes not so many. We'll see what happens. But let's do a go around, but let's not do like what happened in the last week. Let's go. What was the most significant thing you think happened in healthcare or outside of healthcare in the last year? So why don't I start with you, Deven? What's your thing?
Thought you might start with me. I mean, there have been a lot of significant things that have happened, but I guess one of them would be the resurrection of TEFCA as a sort of viable initiative by ONC. I think largely spearheaded by Nikki Tripathi. I think a lot of people thought that whole aspect of high tech, this sort of voluntary network of networks, was never going to happen. And now it looks a lot more like it's a real thing. And I think we'll spend much of 2023 seeing just how viable that really is as a kind of voluntary network. Will anybody come to it, participate in it? Will it, in fact, make data more available to patients, as has been the promise all along? There are a number of issues still to iron out. But I think that they're poised to sort of announce who the anchor, what are called QHINs, Quality Health Information Networks, that are going to sort of be the anchors of this national network. I think that will happen in the first quarter of 2023. And again, it was something that I thought was dead in the ashes and has now been significantly resurrected. So that was a significant development, I thought.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. I did see one thing on Twitter today about a company that had been through Y Combinator, a bunch of 26-year-olds were,
yeah, I saw that.
Impressed to find out the healthcare data was messy, and there's quite a hysterical piece on His Talk yesterday by a Chuck Dickens about how the Ghosted Christmas present or past over goes to visit Reed Hastings at Netflix, and all the reasons why Netflix couldn't get anywhere over the 2000s and 2010s, because employees got their video benefits through their employer, and the AMA, the American Movie Association, fixed pricing, and they tried to sell the Netflix tools to Blockbuster Video, who weren't interested in cost reductions. And it plays out. It's really quite worth a read if you haven't seen that one. But healthcare technology story's going to run and run. Jen, what do you look at the last year or so? What was the big deal for you?
Well, I think we have to first talk about abortion and all of the.
I wonder when that was going to come up.
Yeah,
I keep trying to forget it, Jen.
I know.
We're trying to do the amnesia thing. It's not working.
Yeah, I know. I did think for a second, was that just this year? It seems like it's been in the forefront for a long time. But I think that just changed so much dialogue, so much of the political realm. It pushed employers to get into this in ways that many did not want to, but kind of forced their hand anyway. And I think it's kind of connected to this whole aspect of employers really being active to close gaps in care and gaps in access. And so we've seen that with women's health. We've seen it with mental health benefits. We've seen it with different aspects of provider networks and getting people getting direct contracts in place and so forth. So I think it's been an interesting year in that, but abortion definitely stands out top for me.
All right, fantastic. Casey.
Well, I'm, going to, weigh in with, sort of echo what Jen just mentioned, because I'm old enough to remember what it was like before Roe versus Wade, and to have had a pre-Roe versus Wade experience in that zone, which radicalized me in a lot of ways that weren't really surprising. But to watch us losing the ground that we've lost in human rights around healthcare over the last, few years has been alarming. But we're just going to have to keep working. And the other thing this is something that did happen at least in my awareness over the last couple days, was apparently in the UK, the NHS has been working toward, data access for everybody, and everything was supposed to be, they were going to be all the pipes were going to be open as of kind of now. But the British Medical Association all of a sudden went, oh no, we can't do that. We have to stop. We have to stop. We can't do that. And it's like, wait a minute, guys, you knew about this for how long? And then all of a sudden, basically at midnight on the day when this is supposed to happen, you're saying, no, we have to find the off switch. No. So to me, both the loss of rights and also the absolute refusal of, deep system players, particularly the folks who've been there for a minute, it's like, no, nothing's going to change. So we're just going to keep doing everything we've been doing, and nothing's going to change. And so far, they're not wrong. And so we have a mess of a system here in the US, and we're, spending $4 trillion a year and losing rights left and right. And, other places which think of, if the US thinks that they're a global leader in much of anything at this point, we really need to cut that out, because I don't really think we are. I don't think we have been in any meaningful way for a good while. We just keep telling ourselves that story and thinking that if we just say it, that people will believe us. But, nope. So not as though I'm going into 2023 depressed. I'm more galvanized. It's like, well, we have work to do. So let's just keep going.
That's good. I'm with you. And that whole, I was asked by somebody to recommend a new type of EMR, going back to sort of where we're world leaders in, that could work for a small nation. And I said, well, they want outpatient or inpatient, because there's lots of interesting new outpatient EMRs, because this apparently the health minister there doesn't want to deal with Epic. And I said that, if you want to start with inpatient, there are a lot of choices. And we've seen a bunch of European countries try to take on Epic, and, there's lots of bad mojo from Denmark and Finland and elsewhere about that. So we may be leading in technology, but there's some lots of issues, there ahead, and they're there and thereabouts. Anyway, Mike.
Well, I think that Casey is right that people are beginning to look big picture. We certainly see it with anthropologists and historians right now. Like Jen said, the Dobbs decision triggered a look back, and the historians that I interact with are looking back not simply to 1776, but to the 300 years that preceded that, when we established a pattern of abusing indigent peoples, abusing African Americans, subjugating women, and then wrote a constitution that allowed 6% of the people who were living in our geography at that time to actually participate, and called it democracy. When you look at a country like that has that kind of beginnings, it's not surprising that health was not an issue. Health wasn't even on the radar. What they were attempting to do is to figure out how to bring these 13 disparate colonies together, to unite them. And most historians agree that had they tried to queue up slavery, it would have never been possible. So they accepted slavery, they accepted subjugation of women and Native Americans, and that became then our culture. So the end point of that, for anthropologists at least, is Trump. You get Trump because you've got 250 years of living this way based on 300 years before that. And so what do you expect? Of course, you're going to end up with people who can vote for someone like this. I think so. It's that emphasis on the big picture. I think that Deven was right that, technology, certainly there are a million micro issues on technology and health technology, but what people are also beginning to look at is the fact that technology, as it has occurred with the internet and so forth, has been greatly underestimated in terms of the disruptive force on humans, on the human population, that it's just too much to absorb. It's not simply that our teens are looking at the screens too much. It's that we don't know how to accommodate so much instantaneous information, whether it's accurate or inaccurate. Human beings are not built to absorb that. And so the fact that we haven't yet come to grips with that, or that we're suffering, or that things seem off kilter, at least from the anthropologist standpoint, they're beginning to say, well, what did you expect? We've never encountered anything like this before. What do you expect? So anyway, I think what I'm sort of grappling with is American culture. American culture, to me, has been based on a unhealthy kind of set of circumstances. And I sort of feel like if we want to change the culture of America, you might want to begin with addressing equitable health services for everyone. I think that may be the way back into some sort of sanity.
Yeah, I've been, agreeing with you on that for a while, but I don't see any approach towards that sanity. So if I was to, say what happened in the last year, Dobbs is probably the biggest single thing, but in some ways that's a culmination of a 30 plus year effort on behalf of the religious right and non-religious right to change the nature of the Supreme Court. In fact, it's a stalking horse for all the other bad stuff the Supreme Court is doing to oppose voting rights and workers' rights, something else to keep corporations happy. So that's one that's a huge thing. But I'd also point that there's a lot of other stuff that's gone on this year. So I remember last year saying what could be, I think we were saying what could be really bad things that could disrupt the domestic agenda. And one of them was, well, maybe we'll get really involved in foreign policy because either China will invade Taiwan or Russia will invade Ukraine. Well, Russia did invade Ukraine, and actually, for American politics and for the world, it's actually been a galvanizing and an amazing thing because of how amazing well the Ukrainians have done. And Zelensky made a great speech, which I actually watched the whole 20 minutes of at Congress last night, really, talking about the role of democracies coming together. And that was pretty inspiring stuff, even though everyone on the right apparently wanted to wear a suit and tie and not his combat fatigues that he wore to as a wartime
president on a war footing. He can
actually, somebody dug up a photo of Churchill visiting the White House in 1944, and he was wearing his combat gear as well. So there's a strong legacy there, and I think Zelensky knew what he was doing. Anyway, the amazing thing is that we got a significant piece of legislation. Now, most of it was about energy and other stuff, but it did have legislation eventually about the Medicare negotiating with drug companies, which has been hiding for 50, 60 years. And it also had, some fixes to the Obamacare stuff. It also had, and then more recently, it looks like we're going to get some fixes to some extension of the public health emergency to keep Medicaid sort of not completely collapsing and throwing a bunch of people back on into the uninsured rolls. So we did actually get some legislation last year, despite the domestic legislation, despite all the craziness that's been happening internationally. So in some ways, you could say that was maybe keeping us on the level or playing defense or whatever, because we're extending stuff that's already happened, but it could have been a lot worse. So I think that's one piece of hope. The piece that's not been so hopeful is, and I think in the business that I'm in, most of my sort of day job is, this was the absolute year where the stock market has tanked we've gone to, inflation became the big deal, interest rates started going up. And although it really started happening last year, certainly this year, all those digital health companies that got out before they were going to change the world, have essentially collapsed as business entities. They haven't quite, many of them are still struggling along, but, their valuations, which even though they're sort of potentially higher than they should be now, are still, 10 to 20% of where they were at their height. And I think, the collapse in that and the rupture, sort of the end of, although there's been a decent amount of venture capital spent this year, the reduction of venture capital is really allowed the healthcare system as a whole to go, yeah, this is one of those things where every so often people come at us from the outside and say we're going to change healthcare, but really it's going to be the same. So yeah, you could argue, Deven, that Tesco will give some more opportunities and there'll be some more data around. But speaking of somebody who's just going through a health experience of my own, where I'm trying to get my data and my records and stuff and get my images, it took me I've now lost them. They're in this big pile of papers. Somewhere here is my here it is. Here's my MRI. If I could find a way to play this and find a way to send this to my other doctors, I could have free distribution of my images.
We have tons of readers, Matthew, as you can imagine. All of the ones that we collect for our patients come to us on exactly that same media.
Well, I mean, I should come down to the Mountain Dew and get it done. I mean, I'm having my so now apparently the fellow who's going to do the doctor who's going to do my injection next week can actually access the UCSF system. But I found out, for example, this week I was saying, I couldn't get my images, but I could see my stuff in my chart. The hospital I had this done in is an affiliate hospital to UCSF, so it's on the UCSF Epic My Chart system. But when you click into the image report, it doesn't have the image with it. And all the UCSF people I know were saying on Twitter, no, it's there. Click at the bottom, but it's not there for the affiliate hospital. Somehow it's been different from the main UCSF hospital. So it's just another little thing of all the complications I've seen going through the system, including just the basics of you try to get hold of a particular surgeon or pain clinic or whatever, and it's, please leave a message, we'll call you back within 72 hours. If they need to get some information from you, they'll send you a PDF. Please download this, fill it in by hand, fax it back. PDFs that aren't fillable in, forms that, and stuff that the rest of society and technology fixed 20 years ago, basically, or at least 10 to 15, is still quite acceptable, partly because these people are so busy, they don't have to care. It's one of my places that, it's still hard to get specialty appointments. It's not like they're going out of business for not adapting. So why should they? Anyway, that's kind of my moan for the year as a patient experience, which I was not intending to have, but I had quite a lot of. Rather better in France when I broke my rib than here when I collapsed and couldn't walk. So there we go. Anyway, so let's dive into a couple of these. What do we think? I mean, Jen, I'll go back to you, and you raised Dobbs and the end of Roe v. Wade and the reaction from employers and elsewhere. What do you think it means more generally? What are people going to have to, in the employer world and in the political world, what sort of reaction do you think we're going to see over the next couple of years? Because don't forget, ain't going nowhere with the Republican House. That's no one mentioned.
Right.
The great Democratic victory in the fall still meant we lost the House. So Jen, what's your take on the next steps there?
Well, I think that this is kind of connected to something that's been happening over the last many years, which is that trust in the government is going down, and trust in most other institutions is going down, and trust in employers has gone up in some cases and kind of stayed steady in others. And so people expect more and more and more from the companies that they work for, especially if they're working for a company that proclaims to be 100 best company to work for, or really invest in people and so forth. And we know that there's a correlation between how well you take care of your people and how well the company performs, even though plenty of the layoffs have been being done recently in the opposite way of that. But that there's, for many years, we've kind of seen more and more being put on employers' shoulders in terms of, we want you to take care of our health in new ways. We want you to give us a sense of purpose, and I want to work for a place that cares about me, and all of these things that might be unrealistic demands of a company, but they're still there. And I think that's just going to continue. And we see now that with the politicians just unable to get much done, the employers then have to solve and innovate because they're the ones who are footing the bill for healthcare. So I think we're going to see more of that. We're still going to see this big divergent experience between the companies that put a ton of resources into healthcare and benefits and the ones that are just skimming by. But I still think even with the market for the health tech companies really dropping, there's still a lot of innovation happening and a lot of smart companies working with innovative providers who are figuring out how to make sense of the patient experience and make sense of how people access healthcare, even despite all of these odds against us.
If I was to push you a bit on Dobbs and Roe v. Wade, both from the employer side, yes, stuff's been done. Do you think there's going to be any significant change in what employers are doing, around that issue, and will that trigger into other stuff? I mean, how do you see the clients you're working reacting to that?
Well, I think a lot of employers have put in travel benefits, and some of them have done that boldly. Some of them have done that very quietly, and they're trying to figure out how to fill in gaps in access. And it's so I think that's going to continue. I don't know that we're going to see a ton of bold moves on that in the next 6 months, because there's not really I don't expect that there's going to be another triggering event. But I think more and more organizations are going to see other companies doing that, and more will follow. And a lot of the different niche players who are supporting women's health in some way, they're kind of adding more and more and more services. So employers don't necessarily have to make a bold change in their health plan design. They can get one of these more high touch services in place, and then lo and behold, there happen to be all of these additional services and support there. So I think that's kind of what we'll see in the near term.
Casey, you want to dive in on this?
Well, talking about employers as being sort of in the catbird seat here, that's true, because we have turned and said, okay, well, healthcare is not a human right, or at least not according to the political will that we think we have in this country. So we're just going to turn it over to the business sector and tell them, you have to do this. And the thing that has just flummoxed me for as long as I've been paying attention, which is not just a couple days, I've been around a while, but what I can't believe is that business in general has not risen up and said, we're already spending an awful lot of money on, our people, but the problem is so endemic across the entire economy that maybe if we stopped pretending that only our employees get to have the rights to have all of this cool stuff, whatever it is, in the benefits package, but that everybody has some kind of right to at least a basic set of care services, starting with freaking housing, at least, because housing is a social determinant of health. Mm-hmm. It's one of, it's basically kind of the root one. If you don't have a place to live, you're kind of screwed and everything else. But I cannot understand why the business community, as much as they don't like paying more in taxes, it's like you could get away without spending any more than you're already spending if you just shifted your power paradigm to start pushing for everybody to get access to the good stuff, as opposed to, well, you have to work for a company that actually gives you benefits. And, we haven't required that really. We kind of have, but not really. And, meanwhile, people are left begging by the side of the road, literally, and, in some places. And, look at the tent camps that are in the major cities across the US. It just, it's embarrassing to consider yourself a developed country and people are living in tent cities in your big cities. It's like, how do we square those two things? I haven't been able to do it. I'm waiting for somebody to try.
Yeah, no, it's super tough. And we're having, things like in New York City where they're now trying to do involuntary psychiatric hospital commits and stuff. We've never. It's been a problem that's been sitting there forever for so long. I mean, I remember Herb Caen, who used to be the great San Francisco columnist.
Remember him well. Used to read him every day.
Right. Well, he's been dead for a while, so I've been reading him every day.
But remember, I'm old. I've been around a while.
But I mean, he would say, even the 30s, and even when we didn't have, even when things were really bad, we didn't have the level of sort of homelessness and obviousness that we had. He was complaining about in the 80s, right, in the 90s. Obviously, it's much worse now. No one seems to be caring. We have a lot of conversation about these problems, but politically, you can't get anything because of the way that our politics works. We've talked about this many times regarding the Senate and the role of rural states versus urban states, and the role of cities, etc. Politically, it's very hard to get anything done about that. And cities spend a lot of money, dealing with homelessness, and San Francisco is sort of exhibit A, failing to figure out the root cause. So it's very, very tough.
It kind of gets to what Mike was starting out by saying, though. These are fundamental flaws in the way our whole country was built, because the culture started out being about wealth and greed and individualism. And so you have to kind of put those fundamental things on their head. And I've been spending a lot of time with my nieces and nephews with the holiday season and everything. And when kids are at the age where they ask you why, why? Well, I joke with them a bit, but if you ask why enough times, it always comes back to capitalism or patriarchy, like everything. And that's the fundamental thing. And we have to change some of those fundamental parts of the culture to really get the big fixes in, like Casey's talking about.
And I'm beginning to think, Jen, that the patriarchy is the bigger one, the one where we really need to concentrate, and where we're not adequately appreciating what this Dobbs thing was all about. We sort of think like, or make believe that women got a fair shake after Roe v. Wade, but the reality is that in terms of healthcare statistics, the maternal fetal numbers are dreadful in the United States. They're worse for women and for infants than they are for everybody else. I was looking recently at a National Archive commentary on women during the 19th century, because I was trying to figure out, well, why is it that the 19th Amendment took till August 18th of 1920 for women to get the right to vote? How is it possible that it could have taken that long? And what the National Archives said about women in the 19th century, they said, unless a woman was single or widowed, she had few reasons to naturalize prior to the 20th century. Women, foreign-born or native, couldn't vote. And until the mid-19th century, women typically did not hold any property or appear as persons before the law. Under those circumstances, only widows and spinsters would be expected to seek the protections of the U.S. citizenship that it might afford. One might also remember the naturalization involved payment of court fees. Without any tangible benefit resulting from a woman's naturalization, it's doubtful that many women or their husbands considered the fees to be money well spent. So, that fundamentally in the 20th century didn't really change either. I mean, my wife, when we first got married, had difficulty on her own getting a credit card without me co-signing. So what I'm saying is what happened with Dobbs and what has happened in a very deliberate way through the evangelicals and conservative Catholics in terms of loading the Supreme Court, this thing isn't simply about reversing Roe v. Wade. This is about getting the nation back to the point where women say, what the hell? How is citizenship going to help me? Why should I spend a nickel becoming a U.S. citizen if I'm a woman in this country? I think that's what the reality is. And so I think not only do we need to lead back to sanity through women, but I think the women's voice has got to be seriously louder than it currently is to get us to a point where this isn't a threat.
I mean, I'd say two things, which, it's not just, yes, a lot of it's about patriarchy and historically about women's roles, but it's got also others, right? So if you just go back to Georgia, right, the voting, yeah. So Warnock won. He beat, the worst candidate in the history of candidates by 2% or whatever it was, right? But if you look at the numbers, voting was down significantly in some parts of Georgia because no mail-in ballots, no easy way to draw ballots, 8-hour waits, in the more African American parts of the more African American counties. This is straight out of the sort of the 1910s through 1960s playbook of the anti-civil rights folks in the South. That goes on. Number two, the other thing that strikes me, I had another brilliant thing to say and I forgot what it was. Deven, tell me what my other thing was.
I don't know. You guys are all depressing me.
Yeah.
It's Christmas, for God's sake.
We should be, well, I mean,
I'm not discounting anything that you've said. Like, it's all true. But I'm like, when can I move? I just got here.
Yeah.
And where should I go?
The Ukraine, right? There's now
I don't know.
there are women
I've
and
been
men
thinking
fighting on the front
Mexico.
lines against the Russians. They're all fighting for democracy. They're just waiting for us to give them aircraft and tanks and rest of them. And they can.
Yeah,
they
some
can
people
fight.
talk about Canada. I got my eye on Mexico. Food's better. It's a little warmer.
I mean, even if you talk about like increasing women in leadership, both in elected positions and in corporations, we had a significant number of women who voted for Herschel Walker.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
Like
true.
this is the thing that I don't get. Although at the same time, you sort of see what happened in some legislatures that are traditionally conservative, where state constitutional amendments around some abortion protections happened in states that you would not have expected. So there was definitely like Dobbs reignited some fury that was directed in a very positive way. And I think also there was a population of women who were generally voted conservative, but sort of never thought that Dobbs would ever happen. And then when it did, it was a bit of a wake-up call. So maybe there is some hope that, notwithstanding, that there is a population of women who will continue to vote against their own self-interests. There are a number of them who sort of realized that they needed to be a lot more active and would be more active and would be persuaded to go to the polls to fight for something that they thought they would never have to fight for.
I think the notion
you're
of
right. I
bodily-
remember my second point now, that Zelensky last night, turns around and hands over the Ukrainian flag signed by a bunch of soldiers from the front line, and he hands over to a female Speaker of the House, although she's going to be replaced by a man, and a female Vice President. So we're getting somewhere, but yeah, I mean, it seems to be very much one-way traffic, and you have a lot of I won't quote their names, but you know who I'm talking about. You have a lot of female Republicans in the House who appear to be determined to wind the clock back on everyone for everything, unless it involves getting an AK-47, which will wind the clock forward. Anyway, sorry, Mike, I cut you off.
I do think that the notion of bodily autonomy resonated. So, like you said, we were able to take the issue and point it toward a functioning democracy. And I think women were basically discovering their own voice in terms of don't mess with my bodily autonomy, with my decision making. But I think that now, we got to slam dunk that really hard. I think, it was part of the reason why we did okay in the 2022 midterms. But I think, that theme has got to continue. And I think women can take the lead on that. But it is true, obviously, that, it's not simply about women, but women and children, and especially when it comes to stats on healthcare, it's pretty clear cut what's happened. And so, if we were to even just focus on that element of services, not focus on anything else like equal pay or equal employment, but we're just going to say, hey, women need to have control over their own decision making at the times of decisions on birth, and just ultra focus on that through a variety of different service provisions. I think that would be helpful, that would be a way of making the point in a very deliberative kind of policy way.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, what I am still struggling with is that you're seeing activities from the system, right? You're seeing a lot more, not so much about women and children. We're still doing a lot of talk about health equity, a lot of talk about, a lot of discussion about that, a lot of recognition there's a problem there. And maybe, the more so than other years we've had. I mean, I've heard a lot about that over the last 18 months. I don't know how much of it's filtering through to the front lines. A lot of these issues obviously are, okay, they're bad for all women and all children, but they're worse clearly for poorer women and poorer minority. And if you're a minority, that it tends to be a lot worse. So I can imagine stuff happening that way. The problem is, and there is a good amount of conversation from CMS and others about, focusing on, and even the Biden administration as a whole, about focusing on equity and health equity across the board. So there's a lot of sort of conversation in the right zone. I don't know if we now missed our shot about getting any sort of money attached to that. Maybe there's something that I'm missing in the Budget Act, that just got passed. Did it get passed last night, or was it going to get passed today? I'm not sure. It's going to get passed soon, but it's, there's money for Ukraine and God knows what else in there. But I'm just worried that, we're now going to go into 2 years of sort of stalemate and stagnation. We're going to 2 years of arguing about, what's that Republican Party where the people who voted for Herschel Walker and voted for DeSantis, they're still, they don't seem to have any policy. They certainly don't want to have any policy that seems to be woke enough to care about the people who haven't been getting their fair shake. So
the entire Republican policy can be boiled down to own the libs. That's
I mean, yeah, you're right, but I mean,
that's it.
But I mean, so there doesn't seem to be any, but at least in the old days, quote unquote, there was, discussions about policy and, the Paul Ryans of the world talking about managing money better and all that kind of stuff. That seems to have gone away completely now. And it's just like, it's on those, but we're going to go back to, the way that Mike was talking about. We have basically half the population, or half the voting population, or half the voting active population, happy to be on that side of the ledger and, argue about whether Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump is a better, messenger for that pretty awful message. So I don't know. I'm depressed about the concept. I understand we could do things around women and childbirth and health equity, and there are sort of slow things going in the right direction. But to see, really significant legislation around a sort of New Deal for that, or more health.
No, and I mean, it's
very hard.
It's impossible to get the attention of any, people who are determined that owning the libs is like their whole reason for being. They have no interest or inclination in, to see anybody else as being human beings, or to observe the rights of other people, be they citizens or not. That they have no interest in anything other than holding power so they can continue to own the libs.
But Casey,
and what they get out of that, I don't know. But that seems to be their whole thing.
I get there's a whole bunch of anthropology here around tribalism, around, identifications, and if you go down the fascist argument, there's a lot, and this works for religion and a bunch of things. It's not, those among us who think of themselves as sort of, free thinkers in the tradition of the Enlightenment are by no means winning the, done well historically, but by no means winning the overall, the overall game. And as Mike, you point out, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence and wrote the Constitution all thought they were in the tradition of the Enlightenment, but weren't as quote unquote enlightened as we might be. But it does come down to the fact that we've got all this activity going on. It's still very much in the balance as to who's going to win the next presidential election. Maybe Biden runs, maybe he doesn't. The conversation, I thought the conversation last night about Zelensky was very interesting because, right now he thinks both sides of the House and Senate are on his side. But there are a lot of people on the Republican side saying, we're not going to stand up for democracy. And, when we should be, I saw Lauren Boebert talking about, we haven't defended our own borders, let alone defending Ukraine's. And, you're starting to see a lot of people saying that they're not that interested in this. And that's a significant number. And almost all of the pro-fixing stuff that's wrong with healthcare, not to mention housing and everything else, has to, there's no ideas on the Republican side at all, as we just mentioned. So to me, it's, we're at the same time having, and Biden, how many times this year has Biden now had to come out and make a special speech about, fascism and democracy? We still have the January the 6th thing going on. There's all this stuff in the background. So our appeals to, a finer future and a better America are all great. You know, yes, we did get some energy stuff passed, and maybe I'll get solar power on my house because there'll be a subsidy or whatever, and that kind of stuff may help us in the long run in some of the issues we have, like global warming and elsewhere. But it still seems to me that this fundamental fight, you know, is the one that Mike talked to at the moment, has to go on, and that's going to stop any of the progress. I mean, there'll be some areas stop the progress we're talking about. So sorry to depress Deven again, but
but I think, you know, I do think, Matthew, that the sharpness of this debate and the obviousness of Trump's assault on democracy is helpful. I mean, I'm optimistic about it. I'm glad that he ignited this fight because it exposed who we are and what's possible and what's not. And so I say, have at it. You know, I don't see Trump doing better in the next couple of years. I see him doing worse. And why is he going to do worse? Because people are going to say, screw that. And part of that pushback is women saying, like hell, am I going to do that? Am I going to go back in that direction? So I'm all for it. You know, I hope that the debate gets even sharper, that we feel even more threatened so that we'll respond in a way that's appropriate, because I think then, you know, we have the chance of making this a better nation. And that's, you know, what it was supposed to be about from the beginning, a living document, improvements.
We could start living up to our initial promises.
Yeah.
We'd be awesome.
Yeah, right.
all right. Well, we're going to get optimistic. So we're at the stage of the Christmas show.
Yes, Christmas show is
coming
starting,
up to
baby.
a quarter before the hour, where we're starting to get a few special guests trickle in. I can see John Neptune.
Oh yes, and there's Jennifer
Manhattan,
reporting in
Jane
from the car
Goldsack from
somewhere.
the hellscape of Florida.
That's right.
Driving, looks like you're driving a lot. Isn't it illegal to own a Tesla in Florida?
No, she's not driving.
I'm not driving, and
But you are in a Tesla. I think you're breaking some kind of law. DeSantis will have that. There must be a don't say to work. Although now that Musk is a right-wing nut job and not a sort of top liberal, who knows where that will end up.
Okay.
I feel like if you live here and believe in science, you've got to go all in and drive a Tesla.
Well, I've just had a solar power person come to my house, says that Tesla's batteries are no longer the best anymore, and that there are a whole bunch of new ones. They're also...
I will tell you this though, we had them during Hurricane Ian, and everyone went down for a week, and we had power, and it was an absolute godsend. It was, I cannot argue with a Tesla product, much as I dislike the man.
Right. So we have just joining us. We have Johnny Neptune, Jane Goldsack, and Rosemary Days come in. I think we might get a couple more people sort of skip in over the next couple minutes.
And here comes
just about to show up. So we'll give everyone a chance to come on. We've been having a long conversation. This one got very philosophical before you guys showed up. So we got very philosophical. Mike Magee caused the trouble here because he started talking about anthropology and took us all the way back to 1776 and the previous 300 years. Deven tried hard to, like I said, what's the big thing that happened this year that's important? And Deven said, well, it's fixing TEFCA and it's actually going to happen. We're going to get our data. And I don't think we've touched on that again, other than me complaining I couldn't see
I batted small and I got overwhelmed by all the big picture horrible issues.
We did pick up on some of the big things of the last year, which were obviously Dobbs, the Ukraine situation, Russian invasion of Ukraine, all the rest of it. So we'll give a couple of people. I've got a couple of emails coming in from people who say they were stuck in airports or stuck in the airport. But let's really quick. We'll see the people who shows up. One note: I haven't spoken to, but I've had a back and forth with Ian Morrison, who decided that he was so desperate to get out of coming on the show that he thought he'd have a quadruple bypass. So he had that late last week and is apparently doing quite well in his recovery and should be going home in the next couple of days. So our best wishes to Ian for that. But let's real quick. I asked everybody else this, and this got into a long conversation. But for those of you who are just coming on, and I don't know if we are going to have a couple more, I want to know, just in the first go around, what was the most significant thing you think was the most important that happened in the past year? So and this could be personal, it could be a healthcare thing, or could be not a healthcare thing. So JL, why don't you tell me what What do you think the big thing of the last year was?
I'm not prepared for that. I'm going to pass. I'll pass.
All right. We'll come back to jail. Somebody looks like they can answer this. Kim, you can always certainly answer this because you're my go-to guy for answering stuff off the cuff. So
the most important thing that happened in the last year?
Yeah.
I guess that we survived. those of us that are fortunate enough to have done that.
Well, you were expecting nuclear war or just...
Well, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, as you may or may not have noticed. And if we were living in the Ukraine, our lives would be significantly different. I loved Zelensky's comment last night that the money that we're giving them is not charity, but it's an investment. And I'm afraid many people are not looking at it that way.
That's a good point. Rosemary.
I like what Kim said, but I guess I have to talk about Dobbs, and I think from my frame that was undoing 50 years of what we thought had been established as a right, and it's a huge setback for women and men, frankly, in my opinion. So instead of being able to march toward more progress, we're now on our heels and having to regroup. And I'm not giving up hope at all, but it's just a setback.
So, Rosemary, I know you look at this a lot. What do you think the impact is going to be, sort of politically, policy-wise, over the next couple of years from that? I mean, we're not presumably going to get much change at the federal level with the Republicans coming into power. If you had to say how you think that's going to change, I lost Jen this about 15 different ways, and she was a bit slippery in her answers, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, oddly, as with some bad things, sometimes there's good things, and I think it was very galvanizing as an issue we saw in the midterm elections. And the action moves to the state level for now, and I was just very encouraged by a piece that was in the New York Times actually about gun control and kind of reframing that as gun safety, and organizations like Moms Demand Action and others that have really taken this movement to the local and state level and have made significant change. And that doesn't tend to make the national news as much, but it was a really great compendium of progress. It was in the New York Times like this past week. And
I read that myself, and it was.
And so I thought, okay, and that's taken the long view and slogging it out, place by place, and not giving up. And I think that's what's going to have to happen with the pro-choice movement.
Right. So war in the trenches itself, not the Ukraine. Jen Gossack, do you have a big thing for the last year? You can tell us something about the Digital Medicine Society if you've got to think of something bigger.
So first of all, Rosemary, I love what you said there, which is, big picture, highest level. We've seen some pretty terrible decisions, I think, for health and public health and equity, but I think the response is what to celebrate, and I couldn't agree with you there more. The decision to dig in and not lose faith and keep going, I think, is really important. So for the Digital Medicine Society, it's been a really terrific year for us. I think we've seen the conclusion of our first implementation project, so the first pre-competitive development of some digital measures, which I think will sort of light the path going forward. We've seen our partnership with VA go from strength to strength. We've been, I think, really influential in virtual first care. And I'm going to talk and we've launched our education programming, which I think, providing the skills is critically important. It's not just talking about what to do, it's actually positioning people to do the right thing. And we have an ethics course launching in the new year. And as we look at how do we handle data in a post-Dobbs era, how do we think about equity, how do we think about, safe AI, that will be really important. Funny thing from this year, I finally got COVID. Got it either at Health or CNS Summit. So sorry to anyone I saw there. And it was
congratulations,
really
you made it.
I made it. But what was crazy was to reflect on how far we've come. That I had a cold, I was in, I was out, I was able to isolate. I just felt so much privilege that I was vaccinated, that I'd made it through when it was the worst and was able to weather that. And it was quite sort of humbling from a position of thinking how privileged we were during the early days where we could stay safe, and that hopefully we are moving beyond it a bit.
Yeah, it's the COVID thing is fascinating. Funnily enough, my PT who's been coming to my house He had it in April, and then he just tested positive again. He gets tested by his hospital every time. He wasn't symptomatic. But and he was wearing an N95 mask when he came to see me, and I wasn't. So I was, anyway, interesting that, I had the bivalent vaccine before I went to Europe, and I, was in lots of different places. And I've now had somebody very direct contact with somebody who had it, and I didn't get it. I've tested negative. So it's amazing how that's changed our world.
It's amazing.
The people who try to do something different, i.e. China, are really finding out that, that the vaccines matter a lot. And by the way, lots of places in America where the vaccine is still not used, and we're still not getting the number of seniors who've had the bivalent vaccine is way lower than it should be, and we somehow are not getting that rolled out. But yeah, it's as Kim told us many times, that what do you say, Kim? That we've declared COVID's over, and has anybody told the virus? Well, probably not quite yet. JL, come on, you've got to come up with your big thing for the year now.
Well, you almost stepped on the comment that I was going to make. I think that many people have missed that the Chinese Communist Party has basically given up on their zero COVID strategy. And they've essentially said, we're going to try to get back to normal, and we're going to try to get back to normal, maybe using Western vaccines, maybe not. And, as we think about, 3 years of the public health emergency here in New York, or in the United States, and we're just, New York, I was looking at some data before, weekday subway traffic is 64% pre-pandemic, weekend is 77%. So we're still off of, the pandemic normal subway ridership. But, if the pandemic explodes again in China, because you have, almost 1 billion people who are not vaccinated, I just have this scary feeling in my heart, like, man, are we going to see a new variant? Are we going to see something that we weren't expecting that impacts us and sort of takes us in a backward direction? So I wanted to be more positive, but I saw that the other day. I think, a good BBC report about it. That was actually sort of scary. But I will say that, we have embraced vaccination here, the vast majority of people in the United States. And, I know a lot of people like you, who've gotten infected and, who haven't died and who haven't been very sick. And I think, we have embraced science, and I think science has saved us from the worst of this pandemic. I hope.
Another vote for science, even from a guy living, 20 blocks from Columbia, as opposed to whatever they have it in Florida. I'm sure they have universities in Florida. I'm being rude. All right, we have a few minutes left, so let's go around and do it. And just for the 9 of us, I think we have a couple more people who might pop in. Mike Millison might come, might not. But let's just have. Oh, there he is. Speaking of the devil or the saint,
He was lurking.
Michael Millison was
summoned
lurking.
him.
It's just popping in. But what we're going to do now is, hi, Michael.
How you doing, guys?
We've just missed you for what you noticed in the year, so you don't get to say that. We're just going for the last 5 minutes. We're going to go around the group that we've got and ask either what's going to happen next year, or give us your New Year's message or whatever else you want to say. Free start. Okay. So let's start with and then let's try to keep this relatively. We have 5 minutes for 9 of us, so let's try to keep this relatively quick. So let's start. Mike Magee, let's start with you.
Well, what I would say, Matthew, is this is not the time to go dormant. That basically democracy has been queued up. And no matter what your age or where you are, or whether you think you're retired or whether you think you're active, we can't afford to be inactive during this period of time, because in the next 2 years, it's all going to get decided. So I think this is the time for us to move forward rather than go backwards.
Well said, well said. Jen, Benz.
Thanks. I echo what Jen Goldsack said about just feeling so privileged by the time I finally got COVID this fall also. But I also feel that way about just getting to do this work. All of us have an opportunity to do work that really, really matters. Healthcare is really important. And so I'm feeling very grateful for that, the holiday season. And I also want to just encourage everyone to keep the tough topics going, like how we address racial disparities, how we fill in gaps for low-income communities, all of these things that are hard, and they're not the glamorous part of any of this, but we've made some good momentum in those areas, and I think we can keep it up.
Fantastic. Deven.
Yeah, I too am going to keep digging in the trenches, working hard on the issues that are important around getting patients their data, trying to improve that experience. But I do think we will see a case in the federal courts challenging the sort of ability for people to go cross state lines to seek care related to the Dobbs decision. I don't know whether it will be as ready for the Supreme Court, but it'll have massive implications for telehealth, as increasingly we have this dichotomy between states that provide the full spectrum of women's healthcare and states that criminalize it or seek to weaponize it against women or their medical providers, and people seeking care elsewhere and trying telehealth solutions. And I think that's going to get challenged because there will be an aggressive lawmaker in a criminalized state that will go after somebody, and it's going to go up through the federal courts. I think we will see that in 2023.
That's a somewhat scary prediction. And by the way, congrats to Deven on being appointed to the HITAC. HITAC, is that the right?
Yeah, it is. Health Information Technology Advisory Committee. Thank you.
You said that very quickly, but well done. All right, fantastic. Okay, who's next? Jen Golsack.
I want to keep on with, I think, the sentiment that we all share. I feel pretty strongly that, the healthcare innovation, the data rights, that health equity is sort of the civil rights movement of this time. And I think that we have to dig in, we have to do the hard work, we have to do the unsexy work, we have to be absolutely unrelenting in our commitment to moving forward, even when it feels like we're swimming upstream every single day. And I really believe that we will break through. I think there are new issues, but there are new tools, and we've got to keep going.
Right. That's very inspiring messages. Kim.
So I'm one of the many people in the country that are facing this once in a generation bomb cyclone storm, rain changing to snow, gusty winds, temperatures plunging from the 40s to the below zero in a matter of hours. So I'll be happy to just have heat and power the next 2 or 3 days. That's I'm hoping to look through. In terms of next year, the funding bill that's just passed the Senate and hopefully will pass the House, I worry that that's the last bipartisan bill we may see for a couple of years. And I'm thinking that on the federal level, if we're looking for any major health legislation, we may be out of luck. And at the state level, it's all very partisan. So it's going to be very divided. So I am sorry that things are going to get worse at the federal level instead of better.
All right. Rosemary.
Well, I appreciate the comments about health equity, and I'm proud to be in a state that is going to be leading the way with a new federal waiver for Medicaid that centers around health equity. And so I'm looking forward to all the ways that that's going to start getting implemented next year. But in terms of like a really global view, I'm very inspired by the people of Ukraine and frankly, the kind of unified pushback in Europe to not let Putin, basically carry forward the way Hitler was able to. And I'm just, it's troubling, deeply troubling, and yet also inspiring to see how much we are trying to hold on to democracy.
Fantastic. JL.
Look, as you know, Matthew, you're an investor in this space. It's sort of a nuclear winter now for digital health companies. A lot of the luster has come off, I think, the space, but I still think that the demand is there, and we still need new and innovative ways to deliver healthcare. We need new technology, new processes, new ways to deploy people. So I'm optimistic for the new year. The unintended consequence that Deven mentioned of the Dobbs decision and the potential that it could have to drive a 50-state innovation in terms of being able to access telehealth, I think that could reignite the digital health space. I think that would be fascinating if that happens. So I'm excited for the upcoming year and trying to solve problems in healthcare, and wishing everybody happy holidays and a wonderful 2023.
Thanks so much. All right, last couple of people. Michael.
Well, I'd like to predict that in 2 nights, Donald Trump is going to be visited by 3 ghosts and is going to wake up and say that we ought to have universal health insurance. And by the way, I lost the election. That's not a prediction, really, hope. I agree with Jen. I think that we are entering a time when the technology changes and the economic changes and the cultural changes are becoming so ubiquitous that healthcare will be transformed by digital health. What I'm worried about is, one, I have a perfect record of being over-optimistic on how quickly that's going to happen. And 2, maybe going to too many Health 2.0 meetings. And, and 2, I worry that proclamations of democratization ignore the fact that after revolutions, it does not necessarily mean power to the people. It may mean power to the same old people, but with different clothing. So I think we're going to have that digital health transformation. And that really is, I think, especially for everybody on this call, a really important motivator for all of us to keep working for good things to happen. And that to me, frankly, is uplifting to be with the folks here on the same kind of mission. That really is something that makes the new year worth looking forward to.
Fantastic. All right. And last and definitely not least, Casey.
Well, as one of the charter authors of the Patients Included Charters, which was, sort of definitely rooted in the idea of democracy as part of the healthcare system and everything else. But I'm starting to see signal that the idea of patient-led efforts at system transformation might have become something that is not just an idea that maybe one person had, but that it's starting to become, I'm hearing reverb from across the system that might be something that could be happening. So anybody who wants to discuss that further, I'm happy to discuss it. But if you design from day one with the people who will be using whatever that is that you're building, you will have less crashing into the wall than you will if you follow the "if you build it, they will come" idea, which was a great Hollywood movie, but there was just a movie. That's not how life works. So you got to design from the ground up, design from the outside in. Don't come up with some really great idea in a bar somewhere because with two of your bros, because that probably won't amount to much.
Was indeed a great movie, and you do notice that, was it 40 years later, 35 years later, Major League Baseball is now playing a game each year in the Iowa cornfields just because they can. So nostalgia's gone crazy. All right, well, look, that's a wonderful wrap up. Some really excellent messages there, and I think keep digging in the trenches and keep working on what we're doing. And I think we'll all be doing that with our little parts to going forward. And there's a lot. There's a lot to be pessimistic about. There's a lot of problems, but there is grounds for optimism, and there are lots of things that can and should get better. So I just want to say to all of you who've come on the gang, whether you're here right now or and we've had, by the way, I should do my proper wrap up. This week's official guests were Deven McGraw, the mayor from DC, Mike Magee from Connecticut, Jen Benz from the lovely hills of San Francisco, or it might be Mount Fuji out the back behind her, I can't tell. Casey Quinlan from Richmond, Virginia, and then popping in late guest JL Neptune from Manhattan, Rosemary Day from Boston, Kim Billard from the frozen tundra state of the middle of Ohio, Jane Goldsack from Florida. Is it still like 95 degrees in Florida? Hopefully. And Michael Millinson, where it's going to be even colder in Chicago. Great to see you all. Thanks to all of you for coming on the gang, however often you come. Thanks to everybody else who's been on the gang this year. And thanks to all of you who listen to the gang, whether you watch on the video or whether you download it on the podcast. It's always been so great for me to have just to be able to get together, usually once a week, sometimes not quite that often, with such a group of smart and wonderful and frankly very nice people. Because not every hour of the week is like that for me and for all of us. So it's great to get together and have these conversations. And I want to really thank all of you for coming on. Thank everyone who listens, and we will be back not next week, but next year, and hopefully 2023 will be another year. I'm sure it'll be fascinating, and hopefully we'll have some good news for all of us. So with that, it's Matthew Holt, publisher and head honcho and bottle washer at THCB, saying thanks for being on THCB Gang this year, and we'll see you in 2023.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.